If you're looking for some insectoid body horror, well, you come to the right place. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today I have a review for you of The Queen by Nick Cutter. This is published the 29th of October by Gallery Books, and I received a complimentary copy in exchange for an honest review. Now, a lot of people know Nick Cutter best for his book, The Troop, and if you read that and you really enjoyed that, especially some of the horrific elements that come in the end, then The Queen is right up your alley. He kind of doubles down on that body horror grossness throughout, but that's not all the story is. So what's the story about? The story follows a young woman named Margaret, who is, I think, senior in high school, and the way the story is set up is the prologue takes place. You find Margaret trapped in a kitchen of like a banquet hall type situation. And on the other side of the door are just a whole lot of dead people or dead bodies, and dead bodies that are somehow still moving around, that have things growing in them and things emerging from them. And in the middle of all of that chaos is her best friend sitting on a throne, transformed into something else. And then it cuts back to one day in the past. And then you find out what happened in that one day to get from what seemed like an ordinary day to that kind of horrific hellscape that the story started with. You find out that both Margaret and her friend Charity are kind of outsiders, and Charity has been missing for a month. And the narrative of the story, the way it unfolds, is that when Margaret wakes up, she finds a package for her, and it is a cell phone, and it is Charity sending her text messages saying, go see this thing, go here, go that. And there is this scavenger hunt style that continues through the whole day as you try to piece together what happened to Charity, why she's been missing for a month, what's happened during that intervening time, what the events were that led up to her disappearing, and now what has happened to her, that there's this transformation that we know is going to happen, right? Because we have that foreboding right in the beginning of the story. And then that is interspersed with other chapters from the point of view of, I guess you could say, our book's antagonist, who isn't necessarily Charity. So Charity, the monster that she becomes, is one thing, but then how she became that way is also told through the point of view of our villain. And while most of the story takes place from the point of view of our main character, Margaret, we do flash every once in a while to this other point of view of the villain. And so that keeps things moving a little bit in that way and gives you the story from more than one angle at the same time. It isn't that every chapter is a new point of view, but you do jump around once in a while. And that keeps things moving in an interesting way. The story itself is actually quite fast-paced in that way. And it is, almost a typical coming-of-age story, trying to learn about yourself, who you are, how you are in the world, what it means to be an outsider in a sea of the jocks and popular folks, what that means, yet mixed with some body horror, mixed with the idea of revenge, mixed with the idea of what it means to take power for yourself or have things pushed upon you that you didn't want. In many ways, it's very reminiscent of Carrie in that way. And Cutter even acknowledges that in the book's acknowledgments in the end. He says, obviously, I was influenced by Carrie, even though I wasn't thinking of it when I wrote this book. So it has these elements that we're comfortable with, but I think it does them all really well, actually. I think the world building is really good. It isn't some sort of fantastical world. It's just the world we live in present day, yet it is written in a really compelling way. And the relationship between the teenagers in the high school and what it means to be an outsider and awkward at the high school, that all feels really real and lived in. So it doesn't feel false in that way. And our main character fits into that world really well. I think the main character is complicated. She's interesting. She's well-rounded. I think that she feels like someone that you know. She doesn't feel like a stereotype or like she's only meeting the narrative needs of the story. He did a really good job, I thought, of crafting this main character, as well as some of the ancillary characters around her. The main character has this constant tug of war, this constant push and pull between wanting to fit in, but also being unpopular, and between wanting to find out what happened to her friend, but as the day goes on and she finds out there's more nefarious things happening, and it may not be that her friend is a simple victim, quote unquote, then having this fear and concern about what her friend has done or what her friend is doing, and having that constant push and pull, it felt real, it felt genuine, it felt relatable. So I thought Cutter did a really good job with the environment and with the characters as well. The writing is strong, it's propulsive, and it has a bunch of really nice like horror set pieces that are interspersed throughout the story. And there's a concern when you start a story with this prologue that shows this this horrific event, that then it flashes back. That's going to be coming at the end of the story. There's a concern that the kind of set pieces, all these horror elements, are going to come at the end and everything's just going to build. Yet what Cutter does is, by using flashbacks and by having some other kind of secondary characters and by moving between perspectives throughout the story, there are these little bits and pops of like gooey horror violence mixed in. So it's not all anticipation, which I think is really good. There's a balance of anticipating the eventual outcome and what that scene is going to look like. And that scene definitely lives up to your expectations. He does a really amazing job in that final scene, but it doesn't rely only on that one scene. He does a great job of just interspersing little moments of gore and gruesomeness throughout the whole story. So I thought that balance was really good, and it worked with the pacing and with the narrative structure as well. It didn't feel forced. It didn't feel shoehorned in. It felt like a really comfortable pacing and storytelling. I will say, as far as storytelling goes, the one thing that did frustrate me a little bit, and I'm torn on it, is the whole narrative device of this scavenger hunt situation felt superfluous. Like, I couldn't understand why the characters in this world would choose to do this. As far as a storytelling device and a pacing device, I thought it was used really well. And so I thought the story flowed really well, and this device was useful in getting our characters to move from place to place to place, to make new discoveries, to do all these things. So from that perspective, I thought it was useful. But from a character perspective, I just struggled to see why our character would do this. Not our main character, but the best friend, the one who has been missing and is now undergoing some sort of transformation. It always felt a little forced in that way, because the information she wanted to convey, there's this idea that I want you to see for yourself kind of situation, but that all could have been done in a much more direct way. Like, it didn't need to go this very scavenger hunt. Like, you go to this place, and then once you see this thing, then I'm going to send you a new cryptic message, and then you have to go find a new thing, and you have to go from A to B to C to D like this. Like, it just felt like it was hard to reconcile that with the actual characters in the world and their motivations and just the reality of the storytelling. Yet it did a good job at moving the story forward. It kept you interested. So as far as a narrative device, it was fine. So I was able to kind of overlook my frustration with it, but it did feel more useful for the narrative than it did for the story, if that makes sense. And also, just while I'm kind of kvetching for a moment, there are two other things that kind of stood out for me. One is the villain's backstory. It was just over the top. It felt like a cartoon character. It was very cliche, and it worked. Like, I guess you could see how it tied everything together. And it did provide for like some really interesting or exciting set pieces rather. But it just felt too easy, and like really cliche is the only word I can think of. Like, it's over the top and cartoonish, and it was fine. Like, that character was over the top and cartoonish in many ways, so it fit for his character, I guess. But I don't know. It's hard to say that a story is realistic, right? When you have this crazy body horror happening and these like fantastical horror elements happening. Yet you do want some flavor of realism, right? Like, having enough realism in the story is what allows those more fantastical and extreme elements to be accepted, because everything else is grounded. And just having this over-the-top cartoonish backstory for our villain just made everything seem more like a fairy tale than grounded in reality. So that was, it is what it is. It wasn't bad. It didn't detract from the story. I just thought it was a little heavier handed than it had to be, because you could have had the same villain with similar motivations that wasn't so ham-fisted. You know what I mean? But that's okay. It provided a lot of entertaining scenes, and the villain just didn't have to be complicated, I guess. He was just simple. He was very like id motivated, and that's fine. It worked. It got the story moving where it needed to go. And so all the pieces fit together, if a little bit schlocky in the process. The one other thing I will say that frustrated me isn't the right word, but I thought it took away from the story a little bit, was the epilogue. And the epilogue was long. It was almost 10% of the book, according to my e-reader's like percentage meter. It was over 10% of the book. And the whole epilogue was like an Esquire article written by some random reporter talking about the events that had previously happened. So it didn't involve the perspective of any of the characters we'd been following, the main character or the secondary character or the villains or anyone. It was just an outsider's article about what happened. And I can see some of the reasons he did it this way. It gave us like a bird's eye view, which was interesting and exciting, but it felt like it didn't trust the reader to see the morally gray situation that he had already put forth throughout the story. And it felt like it was holding your hand and really laying things out clear for you, that like nothing is as easy as it seems, and there's no black and white distinction between victimizer and victim. And that didn't feel necessary. And even if you wanted to do that, it just didn't have to be so long. When I realized there's still a full 10% of this book left, but I'm no longer going to be following any of the characters that I've become invested in throughout the story, that just didn't feel necessary, So I would have liked if that was shorter and maybe didn't hold my hand as much, because to end the story on that, I thought wasn't great. It kind of soured some of the rest of the story for me, even though I appreciate the kind of bird's eye perspective, and I appreciate what having a uninvested third party analyzing the events of the story, what that looked like versus what it looked like from the inside. I thought that was interesting to have more than one perspective, but it was just a strange way to end the story. Part of me thinks that if that Esquire article had been like broken up between the chapters and you got little bits and pieces of it at a time, that would have been harder because you would have had to have that article, quote unquote, written in such a way as to not like reveal the ending, I guess. So structurally, that would have been more difficult, but it would have been more interesting. And it wouldn't have felt like this big exposition dump right at the end, which is, not when you want to have all of this random, disinterested narration that's explaining to you what you already read. So I wasn't a fan of that. I liked the ending to the story itself. I thought the story itself was really well done, and I thought the ending was fitting. I thought all the pieces fit together really well in a really exciting, compelling, interesting way. So the story itself, I thought, had a good ending. I just didn't like this kind of weird, really lengthy epilogue. Even though I liked what it was trying to do, I just thought it didn't hit the mark for me, What I liked about the story is in many ways, this isn't anything new or like revelatory. It is a coming of age story that's asking what it means to be an outsider and what happens when you try to take command over your own body and when your body is out of your control. And so how do you balance this distinction between wanting to fit in, but also wanting to have control of yourself, but having others impose their ideas of what is right upon you, and not only that, but then take away autonomy or control of your body, and how do you react to that? And what does it mean to be a victim or a victimizer? What does it mean to be monstrous? You know what I mean? It was struggling with all these ideas, and I thought I did a good job at it. I thought these are ideas that are common in many coming of age stories and in many horror stories in general. So it wasn't like everything was entirely new, but the way it approached all of them felt fresh and it felt exciting, and the set pieces were really fun. So the horror set pieces complemented the narrative questions in a way that felt engaging. Really asking these questions about friendship and loyalty and what it means to develop into your own person, to grow into something new, something different than what you were. And it mixes all of these, thought-provoking ideas with just enough Cronenberg-ian body horror to gross you out, which is always fun. So I think this was a really fun story. It's fast-paced. I read it really quickly. I didn't want to put it down once I started because the narrative style was really enticing and it pulled you in, and it had enough action spread throughout that even though you could tell tension was ratcheting up, especially since, they set the ground in the beginning for an explosive kind of finale. So tension was always building, yet there were little pressure release valves throughout the story. So it never felt boring. It always moved at a really good pace. And even though I had some problems with it, I thought it was a lot of fun. I do definitely recommend it. I hope you have a chance to check it out. I think it's actually really common to see body horror and coming of age stories mixed together because coming of age is all about the grossness of your body and learning what your body is and how it works differently and how everything is changing. So it melds really well with body horror. So I think Cutter did a great job of that in this story. I'd love to know what you think. Have you had a chance to read this? Have you read The Troop or any other of Nick Cutter's novels? Let me know what you think about this and any of his other novels down in the comments below. But for now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.